The first book, Philomathus and Epistemon reason the matter. Phi. I am surely very glad to have met with you this day, for I am of opinion that you can better resolve me of some things, whereof I stand in great doubt, nor any other whom I could have met. In what I can. In what I can that you like to ask at me, I will willingly and freely tell my opinion, and if I prove it not sufficiently, I am heartily content that a better reason carry it away then. What think you of these strange things which now only furnishes purpose to all men at their meeting? I mean of these witches. Surely they are wonderful, and I think such clear and plain confessions in that purpose have never fallen out in any age or country. No question if they be true, but they're of the doctor's doubt. What part of it doubt you of? Even of all, for aught I can yet perceive, and namely, that there is such a thing as witchcraft or witches. And I would pray you to resolve me thereof, if you may, for I have reasoned with sundry in that matter, and yet could never be satisfied therein. I shall with good do the best I can, but I think it the most difficult, since you deny the thing itself in general. For it is said in the logic schools, do not try to prove as negative. Always for that part, that witchcraft and witches have been and are. The former part is clearly proved by the scriptures, and the last by daily experience and confessions. Phi. I knew you will allege me my salus, but that as appears will not make much for you. Not only that place, but divers others. But I marvel why that should not make much for me. The reasons are these. First, you may consider that Saul, being troubled in spirit and having fasted long, I'm reading the Demonology of King James. So it's actually written by King James, and it's a conversation between a mortal and a demon. The conversation is between Epistemon and Philomathus on the subject of Satan, witchery, demon, sorcery, necromancy, and related topics. It's a book called The Demonology of King James from 1597 by King James. That's the book I'm reading. So, Philomathus is the mortal, and Epistemon is the demon. And King James basically says that I doubt not as well my permitting to declare the whole particular rites and secrets of these unlawful arts, as also their infinite and wonderful practices, as being neither of them pertinent to my purpose. The reason whereof is given in the last of the first chapter of the third book. Who likes to be curious in these things, he may read. So, I'm curious, so I'm going to read. So, yeah, I'll just start over at the first book with Phi. So, Phi is a human, and Epistemon is a demon. I am surely very glad to have met with you this day, for I am of opinion that you can better resolve me of some things, whereof I stand in great doubt, nor any other with whom I could have met. In what I can that you like to ask of me, I will willingly and freely tell my opinion, and if I prove it not sufficiently, I am heartily content that a better reason carry it away then. What think of these strange news, which only furnishes purpose to all men at their meeting? I mean of these witches. Surely they are wonderful, and I think such a clear and plain confessions in that purpose have never fallen out in any age or country. No question if they be true, but they're of the doctor's doubt. What part of it doubt you of? Even of all, for aught I can yet perceive, namely, that there is such a thing as witchcraft or witches? And I would pray you to resolve me thereof, if you may, for I have reasoned with sundry in that manner, and yet could never be satisfied therein. Yet I shall with good do the best I can, but I think it the more difficult, since you deny the thing itself in general. For it is said in the logic schools, do not try to prove a negative. Always for that part with witchcraft and witches have been, and are the former part is clearly proved by the scriptures, and the last by daily experience and confessions. I know you will allege me, but that as appears will not make much for you. Not only that place, but divers others. But I marvel why that should not make much for me. The reasons are these. First, you may consider that Saul, being troubled in spirit and having fasted long before, as the text testifies, and being come to a woman that was wont to have such knowledge, and that to inquire at such important news, we have so guilty a conscience for his heinous offenses, and especially for that same unlawful curiosity and horrible defection. And then the woman crying out upon the sudden in a great admiration for the uncouth sight that she led to have seen, discovering him to be the king, though disguised and denied by him before. It was no wonder, I say, that his sense being thus distracted, he could not perceive her voice, he being himself in another Chalmer, and seeing nothing. Next, what could be or was raised the spirit of Samuel, profane against all theology, the devil in his likeness, as unapparent that either God those days had been sure? What spirit spake to them in their visions, or then that he could foretell that was to come thereafter? For prophecy proceeds only of God, and the devil has no knowledge of things to come. Epi. Yet, if you will mark the words of the text, you will find clearly that Saul saw that apparition, forgiving you that Saul was in another Chalmer, at the making of the circles and conjurations needful of that purpose, as one of that craft will permit any others to behold at that time. It is evident by the text that how some that once that unclean spirit was fully risen, she called in upon Saul. For it is said in the text that Saul knew him to be Samuel, which could not have been by the hearing tell only by an old man with a mantle, since there were many more old men dead in Israel other than Samuel, and the common wear of that whole country was mantles. As to the next, that it was not the spirit of Samuel, I grant in the proving, whereof you need not to insist, since all Christians of whatsoever sect agree upon that, and none but either the merely ignorant or necromancers or witches doubts thereof, and that the devil is permitted at some times to put himself in the likeness of the saints. It is plain in the scriptures where it is said that Satan can transform himself into an angel of light. Neither could that bring any inconvenience with the visions of the prophets, since it is most certain that God will not permit him so to deceive his own, but only such as willfully deceive themselves, by running unto him whom God then suffers to fall in their own snares, and justly permits them to be deluded with great efficiency of deceit, because they would not believe the truth, as Paul says. And as to the devil's foretelling of things to come, it is true that he knows not all things future, but yet that he knows part. The tragic event of this histories declare, which the wit of woman could never have forespoken, not that he has any prescience, which is only proper to God, or yet knows anything by looking upon. By looking upon God as in a mirror, as the good angels do, he being forever debarred from the favorable presence and countenance of his creators, but only by one of those two means, either as being worldly wise and taught by a continual experience, ever since creation judges by likelihood of things to come, according to the like that has passed before, and the natural causes in respect of the vicissitude of all things worldly, or else by God's employing of him in turn, and so foreseen thereof as appears to have been in this, whereof we find the very like in Michael's prophetic discourse to King Achab. But to prove this, my first proposition, that there can be such a thing as witchcraft and witches, there are many more places in the scriptures than this. As I said before, as first in the law of God, it is plainly prohibited. But certain it is that the law of God speaks nothing in vain, neither does it lay curses or enjoin punishments upon shadows, condemning that to be ill, which is not in essence or being as we call it. Secondly, it is plain where wicked Pharaoh's wise men imitated a number of Moses' miracles to harden the tyrant's heart thereby. Thirdly, said not Samuel to Saul that disobedience is as the sin of witchcraft, to compare to a thing that were not, if it were too absurd? Fourth, was not Simon Magus a man of that craft? And fifth, what was she that had the spirit of Python, beside innumerable other places that were irksome to recite? Book 2. What kind of sin the practitioners of these unlawful arts commit, the division of these arts, and what the means that allures any to practice them. 5. But I think it very strange that God should permit any man, since they bear his own image, to fall in so gross a filthy and a defection. Epi. Although man in his creation was made to the image of the Creator, yet through his fall, having once lost it, it is but restored again, in part by grace only to the elect. So all the rest falling away from God are given over in the hands of the devil, that enemy, to bear his image, and being once so given over, and the greatest, grossest impiety is the pleasantest and most delightful unto them. But may it not suffice him to have indirectly the rule, the procure, the perdition of so many souls by luring them to vices, into the following of their own appetites? Suppose he abused not so many simple souls in making them directly acknowledge him for their master. Epi. No, surely, for he uses every man, whom of he has the rule, according to their complexion and knowledge, and so whom he finds most simple, he most plainly discloses himself unto them. For he, being the enemy of man's salvation, uses all the means he can to entrap them so far in his snares, as it may be unable to them thereafter, suppose they would, to rid themselves out of the same. Then this is sin? Is a sin against the Holy Ghost? It is in some, but not in all. How is that? Are not all these that run directly to the devil in one category? God forbid, for the sin against the Holy Ghost has two branches. The one a falling back from the whole service to God, and a refusal of all his precepts. The other is the doing of the first with knowledge, knowing that they do wrong against their own conscience and the testimony of the Holy Spirit, having once had a taste of the sweetness of God's mercies. Now in the first of these two, all sorts of necromancers, enchanters, or witches are comprehended, but in the last, none but such as errs, with this knowledge that I have spoken of. Then it appears that there are some sorts, not just one, that are directly professors of his service. And if so be, I pray you tell me how many and what they are. There are principally two sorts, whereunto all the parties of that unhappy art are redacted, whereof the one is called magic or necromancy, the other sorcery or witchcraft. What, I pray, and how many are the names whereby the devil allures persons in any of these snares? Epi. Even by these three passions there are within them ourselves curiosity and great imaginations, thrift of revenge, for some torture deeply apprehended, or greedy appetite caused through great poverty. As to the first of these, curiosity, it is only the enticement of magicians or necromancers, and the other two are the allures of the sorcerers or witches. For the old and crafty serpent, being a spirit, He easily pays our affections, and so conforms himself thereto to deceive us to our destruction. I would gladly first hear what thing it is that you call magic or necromancy. This word magic, in the Persian tongue, imports as much as to be any contemplator or interpreter of divine and heavenly sciences, which being first used among the Chaldeans, through their ignorance of the true divinity, was esteemed and reputed among them as a principal virtue, and therefore was named unjustly with an honorable style, which name the Greeks imitated, generally importing all these kinds of unlawful arts. And this word necromancy is a Greek word, compounded of necron and manesia, which is to say, the prophecies of the dead. This last name is given to this black and unlawful science by the figure Synodochi, because it is a principal part of that art, to serve themselves with dead carcasses in their divination. What difference is there betwixt this art and witchcraft? Surely the difference, vulgarly put, betwixt them is very specious, in a manner true, for they say that the witches are servants only, and the slaves to the devil, but the necromancers are his masters and commanders. How can that be true? Any men, being specially addicted to the service, can be his commanders? Yea, they may be, but it is only secondary, for it is not any power that they can have over him, but only as he grants it, willingly, whereby he obliges himself in some trifles to them, that he may on the other part obtain the fruition of their body and soul, which is the only thing he hunts for. A very inequitable contract, forsooth. But I pray you discourse unto me, what is the effect and secrets of that art? That is too vast a question for you to ask of me, yet I shall do a good will, the most summaries that I can, to run through the principal points thereof, as there are two sorts of folks that may be enticed to this art, to wit, learned or unlearned. So there are two means, which are the first stirrer-uppers and feeders of their curiosity, thereby to make them to give themselves over to the same, which two means I call the devil's school and his rudiments. The learned have their curiosities weakened up and fed by that which I call his school. This is the astrology judicar, for divers men have attained to a great perfection learning, and yet remaining overbear, alas, of the spirit of regeneration and fruits thereof, finding all natural things common, as well as to the stupid peasants, as unto them they assay to vindicate unto them a greater name, by not only knowing the course of things heavenly, but likewise to attain to the knowledge of things to come thereby, which at the first face, appearing lawful unto them, in respect the ground thereof, seems to proceed of natural causes only. They are so allured thereby, that finding their practice to prove true in sundry things, they study to know the cause thereof, and so mounting from degree to degree, upon the slippery and the uncertain scale of curiosity, they are at last enticed, that where lawful arts of sciences fails to satisfy their restless minds, even to seek to that black and unlawful science of magic. We're finding at that first, that such divers forms of circles and conjurations, rightly joined thereunto, will raise such divers forms of spirits to resolve them of their doubts, in attributing the doing thereof to the power inseparably tied or inherent in the circles. In many words of God, all confused together, they blindly glory of themselves, as if they, and by their quickness of mind, made a conquest of Pluto's dominion, had become emperors over the Stygian habitat, where in the meantime miserable wretches they are become in very deed bond slaves to their mortal enemy, and their knowledge for all they presume thereof is nothing increased, except in knowing evil and the horrors of hell, for punishment thereof as Adam's was by the eating of the forbidden tree. Excuse me. But I may pray you likewise forget not to tell what are the devil's rudiments. His rudiments I call first in all that which is called vulgarly the virtue of words, herbs, and stones. These are used by unlawful charms, without natural causes, as likewise all kinds of practices, frights, or other like extraordinary actions which cannot abide the true touch of natural reason. I would have you to make that plainer by some particular examples, for your proposition is very general. I mean, either by such kind of terms as commonly daft wives use, by healing for good certain things, for preserving them from evil eyes, by knitting round trees or various kinds of herbs to their hair or tails of the goods, by curing the worm, by stemming of blood, by healing of hoarseness, by turning of their riddle, or doing of such like innumerable things by words, without applying anything, meet to the part offended as mediciners do, or else by staying married folks, to having natural intercourse with others, by knitting so many knots upon a point at the time of their marriage, and such like things which man uses to practice in such arts. For the unlearned men, being naturally curious and lacking the true knowledge of God, find these practices to prove true, as sundry of them will do, by the power of the devil for deceiving men, and not by any inherent virtue in these vain words and practices, being desirous to win a reputation to themselves in such like turns, they either, if they do of the shameless sort, seek to be learned by some that are experimented in that art, not knowing it be evil at the first, or else being of the grosser sort, run directly to the devil for ambition or desire of gain, and plainly contracts with great him thereupon. But methinks these things, means which you call the school and rudiments of the devil, are things lawful and have been approved for such in all times and ages, as in this science of astrology, which is one of the special members of the mathematics. These are two things which the learned have observed from the beginning, in the science of the heavenly creatures, the planets, stars, and much such like. The one is their course and ordinary motions, which for that cause is called astronomy, which word is a compound of nomos and asteron, that is to say, the law of the stars. And this art indeed is one of the members of the mathematics, and not only lawful, but most necessary and commendable. The other is called astrology, being compounded of asteron and logos, which is to say, the word and preaching of the stars, which is divided into two parts. The first, by knowing thereby the powers of the simple and sickness, the course of the seasons and the weather, being ruled by their influence, which part depending upon the former, although it be not of itself a part of mathematics, yet it is not unlawful, being moderately used, but not so necessary and commendable as the former. The second part is to trust so much of their influences as thereby to foretell what common weals shall flourish or decay of that person, shall be fortunate or unfortunate, what side shall win in any battle, what man shall obtain victories at singular combat, or what way, and of what age shall men die, or what horse shall win at match running, and divers others have more curious and profitably written at large. Of this root last spoken, of springs innumerable branches, such as the knowledge of the nativities, the chiromancy, geomancy, hydromancy, arthomancy, practiced and held in great reverence by the Gentiles of old. And this last part of astrology whereof I have spoken, which is the root of their branches, was called by them luck. This part now is utterly unlawful to be trusted in or practiced among Christians, as leaning to no ground or natural reason, and it is this part which I called before the devil's school. But yet many of the learned are of the contrary opinion. I grant, yet I could give my reasons to fortify and maintain my opinion. If it to enter into this disputation, it would not draw me quite off the ground of our discourse, besides the waste of the whole day thereupon. One word only I will answer to them, and that in the Scriptures, which must be an ineffable true ground to all the true Christians. that in the prophet Jeremiah it is plainly forbidden to believe or hearken unto them that prophesies and predicts by the course of the planets and the stars. Well, you have said far enough in that argument, but how prove you now that these charms or unnatural practices are unlawful? For so many honest and merry men and women have publicly practiced some of them, that I think if you would accuse them all of witchcraft, you would affirm more, nor you will be believed in. If you had taken good tent to the nature of that word whereby I named it, you would not have been in this doubt, nor mistaken me, so far as you have done. For although as none can be scholars in a school, and not be subject to the master thereof, so none can study and put in practice. For study is not alone, and knowledge is not more perilous and offensive, and it is the practice only that makes the greatness of the offense. The circles and art of magic without committing a horrible defection from God. And yet as they that read and learn the rudiments are not the more subject to any schoolmaster, if it please not their parents to put them to the school thereafter, so they who ignorantly prove these practices, which I call the devil's rudiments, unknowingly them to be baits cast out by him for trapping such as God will permit to fall in his hands. This kind of folk, I say, no doubt, are to be judged the best of. In respect, they use no invocation, nor help of him, by their knowledge at least, in these turns, and so have never entered themselves in Satan's service. Yet to speak truly of my own part, I speak, but for myself I desire not to make so near a comparison. For my opinion, our enemy is craftier, and we very weak, except the greater grace of God to essay such hazards, wherein he pleases to trap us. You have reason, forsooth, for as the common proverbs say, they that eat with the devil have need of long spoons. But now I pray you go forward in the describing of this art of magic. Thus they have come once unto this perfection in evil, and having any knowledge, whether learned or unlearned, of this black art, they then begin to be wary of the raising of their master by conjuring circles, being both so difficult and perilous, and so come plainly to a contract with him, wherein is specially contained forms and effects. But I pray you, or even you go further, discourse with me somewhat of their circles and conjuration, and what should be the cause their wary, for it should seem that they form should be the cause their wary thereof. For it should seem that the form should be less fearful, yet the direct haunting in society with that foul and unclean spirit. I think you take me to be the witch myself, or at the least would fain swear yourself prentice to that craft. Always as I may, I shall shortly satisfy you in that kind of conjurations which are contained in such books, which I call the devil's school. There are four principal parts: the persons of the conjurations, the actions of the conjuration, the words and rites used to that effect, and the spirits that are conjured. You must first remember to lay the ground that I told you before, which is that it is no power inherent in the circles or in the holiness of the names of God blasphemously used, nor in whatsoever rites or ceremonies at that time used, that either can raise any infernal spirit or yet limit him perforce within or without these circles. For it is he only, the father of all lies, who having first of all prescribed that form of doing, feigning himself to be commanded and restrained thereby, will be loath to pass the bounds of these injunctions, as well thereby to make them glory in the inspiring over him, as I said before, as likewise he may make himself so to be trusted in these little things, that he may have the better commodity thereafter, to deceive them in the end with a trick once for all, I mean the everlasting perdition of their soul and body. Then laying this ground, as I have said, these conjurations must have few or more in number, of the persons the conjurers always passing the singular number, according to the qualities of the circle and numbers of apparitions. Two principal things cannot well in that errand be wanted: holy water whereby the devil mocks the papists, and some present of a living thing unto him. There are likewise certain seasons, days, and hours that they observe in his purpose. These things being all ready and prepared, circles are made triangular, quadrangular, round, double, or single, according to the form of the operation they crave. But to speak of the diverse forms of the circles, of the innumerable characters and crosses that are within and without, and out through the same, of the diverse forms of operations that the crafty spirit deludes them with, and of all such particulars in that action, are remitted to the others that have busied their heads in describing of the same, as being but curious and altogether unprofitable. In this far only I touch, that when the conjured spirit appears, which will not be while after manic circumstances, long prayers, and much muttering and murmuring of the conjurers, like a papist priest dispatching a hunting mass, how soon, I say, he appears if they have missed one iota of all their rites, or if any of their feet once slid over the circle through terror of his fearful apparition. He pays himself at that time in his own hand of that due debt which they owe him, and otherwise would have delayed longer to have paid him. I mean, he carries them with him body and soul. If this be not now a just cause to make them wary of these forms of conjuration, I leave it to you to judge upon, considering the length of labor, the precise keeping of days and hours, as I have said, the terribleness of apparition, and the present peril that they stand in missing the least circumstance or rite that they ought to observe. And on the other part, the devil is glad to move them to a plain and square dealing with him, as I said before. Indeed, there is cause enough, but rather than leave him at all, than to run more plainly to him, if they were wise, he dealt with. But no, go forward now, I pray you to turn these, how they become more deacons in this craft. From time that they once plainly begin to contract with him, the effect of their contract consists in two things, in forms and effects. As I began to tell already, were it not you interrupted me, for although the contract be itself to them, by forms I mean in which shape or fashion he shall come unto them. When they call upon him, and by effects I understand in what special sorts of services he binds himself to be subject unto them. The quality of these forms and effects is less or greater according to the skill and art of the magician. For as to the forms, to some of the baser sort of them he obliges himself to appear at their calling upon him, by such a power, a proper name which he shows unto them, either in likeness of a dog, a cat, an ape, or such like other beast, or else to answer by a voice only. The effects are to answer to such demands as concerning curing of diseases, their own particular menagerie, or such other base things as they require of him. But to the most curious sort, in the forms he will oblige himself to enter in a dead body, and there out of to give such answers of the event of battles, of matters concerning the estate of commonwealths, and much like other great questions. Yea, to come he will be a continual attender in form of a page. He will permit himself to be conjured for the space of so many years, either in a tablet or a ring or such thing, which they may easily carry about with them. He gives them power to sell such wares to others, whereof some will be dearer and some other cheaper, according to the lying or true speaking of the spirit that is conjured therein. Not but that in very deed all devils must be liars, but so they abuse the simplicity of these wretches that becomes their scholars, that they make them believe that the fall of Lucifer, some spirits fell in the air, some in the fire, some in the water, some in the land, in which elementals they still remain. Whereupon they build that such as fell in the fire or in the air are truer than they who fell in the water or in the land, which is all but merely stupidity, and forged by the author of all deceit. For they fell may not be weighed as a solid substance, to stick in any one part, but the principal part of their fall, consisting in quality, of falling from the grace of God, wherein they are created, they continued still thereafter, and shall do while the latter day am wandering through the world, as God's hangmen, to execute such turns as he employs them in. And when any of them are not occupied in that, return they must to their prison in hell, as it is plain in the miracle that Christ wrought at Gazareth, therein at the latter days to be all enclosed forever. And as they deceive their scholars in this, so do they in imprinting in them the opinion that there are so many princes, dukes, and kings among them, every one commanding fewer or more legions, and excelling in diverse arts in quarters of the earth. For though that I will not deny that there be a form of order among the angels in heaven, and consequently was among them before their fall, yet either this idea or that God will permit us to know by damned devils such heavenly mysteries of his, which he would not reveal to us neither by scripture nor prophets, I think no Christian will once think it. But by the contrary of all such mysteries, contended with that humble ignorance, that they being things not necessary for our salvation, which return to the purpose as these forms wherein Satan obliges himself to the greatest of the magicians, are wonderfully curious, so are the effects corresponding unto the name. For he will oblige himself to teach them arts and sciences, which he may easily do, being so learned a knave as he is, to carry them news from any part of the world, which the ability of a spirit may easily perform, to reveal to them the secrets of any person, so being they be once spoken, for the thought none knows but God, except so far as you may guess by their countenance, as one who is doubtlessly learned enough in yea, he will make his scholars to creep in credit with princes, by foretelling them many great things, true part false. For it all were false, he would lose credit at all hands, but always doubts them as his oracles were, and he will also make them to please princes, by fair banquets and dainty dishes, carried in short space from the farthest part of the world. For no man doubts that he is a thief, and his agility, as I spake before, makes him to come such speed, much like he will guard his scholars with fair armies of horsemen and footmen in appearance, castles and forts, which all but impressions in the air, easily gathered up by spirits, drawing so near to the substance himself. As in like manner he will learn them low tricks at cards, dice, and much like, to deceive men's senses thereby, in such innumerable false practices, which are proven by many examples in this age, as they who are acquainted with that Italian called Scoto, yet living, can report. And yet are all these things but deluding of the senses, in no way true in substance, as were the false miracles wrought by King Pharaoh's magicians for counterfeiting Moses. For that is the difference betwixt God's miracles and the devil's. God is a creator. What he makes appears in a miracle. It is so in effect, as Moses' rod being cast down was no doubt turned in a natural serpent, whereas the devil, as God's ape, counterfeiting that by common proof, that simple illusionists will make 100 things seem both to our eyes and ears otherwise than they are. Now as to the magician's part of the contract, it is in a word that same thing, which I said before, the devil hunts for in all men. Surely ye have said to me in this art, if all that ye have said to me be as true as wonderful. For the truth in these actions it will be easily confirmed to any that pleases to take pain upon the reading of diverse authentic histories, and the inquiring of daily experiences. And as for the truth of the possibilities that they may be, and in that manner I trust I have alleged nothing whereon I have not joined such probable reasons, as I leave to your discretion, to weigh and consider one word only omitted concerning the form and making of this contract, which is either written with the magician's own blood, or else being agreed upon in terms his schoolmaster touches him in some part, though peradventure no mark remain, as it happens with all witches. Surely you have made this art to appear very monstrous and detestable. But what, I pray you, shall be said to such as maintains this art to be lawful, for as evil as you have made it. I say they favor the pan themselves, or at least little better, and yet I would be glad to hear their reasons. There are two principally that ever I heard used, besides that which is founded upon the common proverb that necromancers command the devil, which you have already refuted. The one is grounded upon a received custom. We see the diverse Christian princes and magistrates severe punishes of witches, will not only oversee magicians to live within their dominions, but even sometimes delight to see them prove some of their practices. The other reason is that Moses, being brought up, as it is expressly said in the scripture, in all the sciences of the Egyptians, whereof no doubt this is one of the principles, and he notwithstanding of this art, pleasing God as he did, consequently that art professed by so godly a man could not be unlawful. As to the first of your reasons grounded upon customs, I say an evil custom can never be accepted for a good law, for the tremendous ignorance of the word in some princes and magistrates, and the contempt thereof in others, moves them to sin heavily against their office in that point. As to the other reason, which seems to be of greater weight, if it were formed in a syllogism, it behooved to be in many terms and full of fallacies, to speak in terms of logic. For first, that the general proposition affirming Moses to be taught in magic, I see no necessity, for he must understand the Spirit of God. There, speaking of sciences, understands that they are lawful. For except they be lawful, they are but abusive called sciences, and are but ignorance indeed. The picture is not the thing. Secondly, giving that he had been taught in it, there is great difference betwixt knowledge and practicing of it. As I said before, for God knows all things, being always good, and of our sin and our infirmity proceeds our ignorance. Third, giving that he had both study and practice the same, which is more monstrous than to be believed by any Christian. Yet we know well enough that before that ever the Spirit of God began to call Moses, he was fled out of Egypt, being 40 years of age, for the slaughter of an Egyptian, and in his good father's land, first called at the flaming bush, having remained there another 40 years in exile. So that suppose he had been the wickedest man in the world, therefore he then became a changed and regenerated man. And very little of old Moses remained in him. Abraham was an adulterer in Ur of Chaldea before he was called, and Paul was called Saul, was a most sharp persecutor of the saints of God, while that name was changed. What punishment, then, think you merits these magicians and necromancers? The like, no doubt, that sorcerers and witches merit, and rather so much greater, as their errors proceeds of the greater knowledge, so draws nearer in the sin against the holy overseers, them which is seen by the miserable ends of many that ask counsel them. For the devil has never better tidings to tell to any than he told to Saul. Neither is it lawful to use so unlawful instruments, were it never so good a purpose. For that axiom in theology is most certain and infallible. Evil is never to be done, thus good may happen. And that's the end of the first part, the first book.